I had only been away for a few days visiting an old friend in Vermont. No drama, no arguments before I left. In fact, Ben had hugged me goodbye, and April had told me not to worry about the garden. She'd water the herbs and lavender. It was ordinary, routine. At least I thought it was. But when the rideshare dropped me off, something felt off immediately. The porch light was off. The windows were dark. And then I saw it, my suitcase sitting neatly beside a plastic bin. On top of it, a pillow I'd sewn years ago, fraying at the edges. My lamp. 2 photographs. And the note. I didn't cry. I didn't knock. What was there to say? I picked up my things slowly, like I was handling someone else's memories. Placed the photos gently inside the suitcase. Tucked the lamp under my arm. Then I walked away. No one pulled back the curtain. No footsteps behind the door. Only silence. But silence can be loud, especially when it's deliberate. At the end of the block, I turned back one last time. The house was still dark. The curtains still drawn. And with that, I kept walking. I spent that night on a bench in the community garden 3 blocks away. Not because I had nowhere else to go. I just couldn't bring myself to call anyone, not yet. I needed stillness. Not the kind that follows betrayal, but the kind that comes before strength. The garden had always been my place of peace. Years ago, before April came into the picture, Ben and I had built the compost bin there together. I taught him how to trim basil without killing the root. We'd come here after school with a plastic trowel and peanut butter crackers. Now I sat on the same bench, older, stiffer, and trying to breathe through a truth I couldn't yet say out loud. My son had removed me from his life, and not with a confrontation, but with a logistical sweep. The next morning, the sky was overcast. I walked toward the bus stop, dragging my suitcase behind me, not because I had a destination, but because I needed to move. The weight in my chest wasn't just grief. It was realization. A slow, dawning understanding that what had happened wasn't impulsive. It had been planned. And I had been the last to know. The sun was just beginning to rise as I got off the bus at the edge of town, not far from where the city park met a new development of modern townhomes. I didn't have a plan. My phone was dead. I hadn't packed a charger because I thought I'd be home by now. I wandered through quiet streets, pulling my small suitcase behind me. The wheels rattled against the sidewalk, a sound that somehow made everything feel more real, more final. Then I saw it. A corner unit, large windows, crisp, white trim, and freshly swept steps. I recognized it immediately. Ben and April had mentioned possibly moving into this neighborhood a few months ago. Back then, it had felt like idle conversation. Something off in the future, not something that had already become real. But it was real. Through the sheer curtains, I spotted Ben standing at a dining table. April sat across from him, flipping through what looked like a folder. Her gestures were animated. At one point, she lifted a glossy brochure, real estate no doubt, and pointed at it with excitement. Ben gave a tight smile and looked away. He picked up a coffee mug, brought it to his lips, but didn't drink. His eyes drifted to the window. For a split second, I thought he saw me, but he didn't react. Or maybe he didn't want to. That moment hit harder than I expected. Not because they were looking at real estate, but because they were doing it together. Focused. In sync. Like I had never existed in their equation. Ben's shoulders slumped the same way they used to when he was a teenager, caught between telling me the truth and trying not to disappoint me. April said something else, and he nodded slowly. And that's when it clicked. All the small things I'd brushed off the past few months snapped into place like a cruel puzzle I didn't know I was solving. The way April insisted on handling the utility bills. The way Ben would change the subject whenever I brought up the house. The strange mail addressed to him but arriving under my name. The missing checkbook. The subtle shift in tone when I talked about our home, and neither of them corrected me, but their silence said everything. I had missed the signs, or maybe I hadn't wanted to see them. There's a kind of betrayal that isn't loud or aggressive. It's slow, surgical. It replaces your name in documents. It transfers mail behind your back. It moves furniture while you're gone. And when you finally notice, you realize you're already gone, not physically, but symbolically. I stood across the street until the curtain fluttered slightly as if brushed by wind. My legs felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. The grief of being edited out of your own life without even a conversation. I didn't go up to the house. I didn't knock. I turned away and walked. No confrontation, no yelling through the door, just silence. But in that silence, I knew the truth. I had been replaced, not just moved out. Replaced. I ended up by the lake near the public library. The water was still and reflective, like it was mirroring the stillness that had settled inside me. I sat on the low stone wall and just stared for a long while. I didn't cry. I wasn't even angry. I just felt hollow. When the world moves on without you, it doesn't do so with cruelty. It does it with efficiency. It redirects the mail. It transfers the accounts. It gives the spare key to someone else. And in the process, you begin to question whether you ever mattered to begin with. The next morning, I made my way to the library. Not for books, but for power. My phone had finally died, and I needed a plug. I found a quiet corner near the window and plugged it in. When it buzzed back to life, there was only one notification. A missed call. From Ben. No voicemail, no text. Just a missed call, time-stamped at 11:42 p.m. the night before. I stared at it for a long time. He hadn't followed up. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket. I wasn't ready to respond. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Then I heard a voice call my name. Soft at first, then louder. Marian. I turned. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. It was Carol Whitman, an old colleague from the insurance review firm I'd worked for after Bill passed. We hadn't seen each other in over 5 years. She was wearing that same deep burgundy trench coat she used to wear back when we used to split coffee breaks. Her smile was still sharp, her eyes still observant. She didn't ask why I was there, just offered me a cup of coffee from the vending machine. We sat by the side window. She didn't press. That's the thing about old friends, they know how to leave space. We talked about our knees, politics, arthritis creams that work and don't work. Then, after a sip of lukewarm coffee, she leaned in and said something that made the floor under me tilt. I saw April last week, she said, at a property mixer. She was all smiles. Said she and Ben were considering listing the house, looking at some new options. Listing the house. As if I didn't live there, I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Carol studied my face like a case file and straightened up. Something's wrong, isn't it? I nodded. In silence. And that silence felt like the first honest thing I'd said in weeks. Carol didn't ask more questions right away. She just sat with me watching the way I held my coffee like it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. That's the gift of old friends, they don't rush you. They know silence can be its own kind of truth. After a few quiet minutes, she reached into her handbag, pulled out a small notepad, and scribbled something. My nephew's a real estate agent, she said gently. He's been hearing rumors about homes changing hands without formal notice. Quiet transfers. He's in the loop. I can ask around discreetly. I hesitated. My first instinct was to wave her off, to say it was probably just a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. and Carol could see that in my face. "You know what's going on, don't you?" she said softly. "I know something's not right," I replied. "But I don't have proof. Not yet." Carol nodded and handed me the paper anyway. "Then let's find it." Later that afternoon, I wandered down to the post office. The clerk, a polite young man with nervous energy and a buzz cut, helped me rent a small P.O. box. I gave him my ID and signed the form with a hand that barely shook. It felt like the first thing I'd claimed as mine in days, even if it was just a metal drawer in a federal building. It wasn't about mail. It was about presence, about saying I still exist. You can't just write me out. That evening, I checked into a small shelter on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but clean, warm, and quiet. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept retracing conversations, patterns, hesitations I'd brushed off too easily. April offering to take over the water bill, Ben forgetting to give me the home insurance renewal last spring, the missing checkbook, mail arriving with his name but to my address. It had all been happening right in front of me. I had just looked away. The next morning, after a lukewarm shower and instant oatmeal from the shelter's pantry, I walked to the one place I hadn't visited in 5 years, my old studio above the used bookstore downtown. I still had the key. It was dusty and drafty, and the hallway lights flickered like they always had. But when I stepped inside, something strange happened. I felt solid again. Present. As if the past hadn't just crumbled around me. This was where I used to meet clients when I did part-time consulting for insurance claims after bill passed. It had always been a quiet place, a place no one but Carol and I really knew about. I kept the lease because, in a way, it felt like the only thing left that was mine. The air smelled like old books and lemon oil. My fingers brushed the bookshelf, the cracked desk, the little fireproof safe tucked under the floorboard. I hadn't touched that safe in years. Until now. I opened the desk drawer and rummaged through old tax records, policy statements, and holiday cards. And there it was, the original deed to the house. My name clear as day. Not a trace of Ben's, not even as a co-signer or successor. Just me. And then the kicker, the co-ownership agreement Bill and I had drawn up back when we bought the place. It explicitly stated that if one of us passed, the other retained full ownership. Period. No conditions, no loopholes. Ben had never been added. We had agreed early on we wanted him to build his own life, not inherit ours by default. My hands trembled not from fear, but from clarity. Then came the stack of bills. Some I had brought with me. Others were still filed away. I flipped through them quickly, water, electricity, trash, all now under April's name. Not shared, not secondary, just hers. And my name gone. Not slowly, not accidentally. It had been removed surgically. Then I saw it. A photocopy of a utility transfer form. The signature was supposed to be mine, but I knew my own handwriting, and that wasn't it. It was close, sure, but off in a way only I would notice. Too sharp, too slanted. As if someone had copied a signature, not written it. I sat back in the chair and stared at the papers spread across the desk. They weren't just moving me out of the house. They were trying to erase me. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I acted. I took out the fireproof safe and carefully placed the deed, the agreement, a copy of my ID, and my most recent tax return inside. I locked it. Then I took a photo of everything on my phone, just in case. That afternoon, I called Carol. I asked her if she still knew that lawyer who used to handle estate transitions for women, Ashby something. She did. Said she'd reach out and get me an appointment. And before we hung up, she said something I hadn't realized I needed to hear. They may have pushed you out, but they didn't know you kept receipts. I spent the rest of that afternoon in my old studio, pacing slow laps between the bookshelf and the window, the floorboards creaking under every step. The light outside faded to a dull amber, casting shadows on the paperwork I'd laid across the desk, like a private war room. Every document was a thread in a tapestry I hadn't wanted to see, but now couldn't unsee. The deed, the co-ownership contract with Bill, the forged utility form. Even a water bill from just 2 months ago addressed, not to me, but to Mrs. April Langston. April had never legally lived in that house, but she was already signing the mail like she owned it. I opened the fireproof safe again, more out of instinct than strategy, and found something I hadn't remembered saving a notarized affidavit from when Bill and I refinanced the mortgage 12 years ago. It reaffirmed sole ownership under my name after he passed. It wasn't dramatic, just paperwork. But in this world, paper was power. By then, the studio had grown cold, so I retrieved an old space heater from the corner and plugged it in. Its soft hum reminded me of the nights I used to stay late preparing insurance claim appeals for widows like me. Women who had no idea their husbands had failed to update a beneficiary form, or worse, whose sons had manipulated them into signing things they didn't understand. Back then, I helped them piece their lives back together. Now it was my turn. I hadn't eaten much, but I wasn't hungry. Not in the traditional sense. I was full of adrenaline and a kind of sharp-edged focus that only arrives when something sacred is disturbed. As the clock neared 7, my phone buzzed. It was Carol. "Ashby Sterling said she can meet tomorrow," she said. "Home office, nothing formal. Bring everything. She wants to see it all." "Is she still sharp?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Carol chuckled, sharper than any of the men who underestimated her. I smiled for the first time in what felt like days. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The city was still stretching itself awake when I walked the 5 blocks to Ashby's address, a tidy bungalow nestled between a law firm and a laundromat. White porch swing, lace curtains in the windows. Not flashy but steady, like the kind of place where truth might still matter. Ashby greeted me with a firm handshake and the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to raise its voice. She was in her early 70s, silver hair pulled back in a short twist, wearing a cardigan that looked hand-knitted and glasses with tiny gold frames. She didn't waste time on small talk. She motioned for me to sit at a wide oak table, then laid a legal pad between us. "Start at the beginning," she said, "and don't leave anything out." I did. Everything. The note on the suitcase, the silent goodbye, the P.O. box, the mail transfers, the studio, the forged forms. She didn't interrupt once, just made quiet notes and occasionally looked me in the eye, like she was taking a measurement, not of what I was saying, but of what I wasn't saying. When I finally pushed the last document across the table, she adjusted her glasses and said, "None of this constitutes a legal transfer. Not the utilities, not the mail rerouting, not the forged signature. They may have built a nice illusion, but it has no weight under the law." She leaned back, tapping her pen. "But if they try to leverage this illusion to refinance list the house or apply for credit, that becomes fraud." The word fraud hit me like a cold slap. I had suspected, but hearing it spoken aloud turned suspicion into reality. Ashby laid out a plan with military precision. A cease and desist letter drafted immediately naming me as the sole owner. A formal notice filed with the county clerk to alert them to any fraudulent title activity. A protective memorandum flagged with the local property registrar instructing all third-party inquiries to seek in-person authorization from me only. It wasn't dramatic, but it was airtight. She printed the first round of documents before I left. I signed them with a hand that no longer trembled. Before I walked out, she added one more recommendation. "Send courtesy copies directly to your son and his wife. Let them know the game's over, but that you're not playing it their way. That afternoon, I stood by the mailbox across from the studio holding 2 sealed envelopes, one addressed to Ben's downtown law firm, the other to April's office at the wellness clinic she managed. Both bore Ashby's letterhead. Both carried truth wrapped in legal armor. I slid them in, one after another. And just like that, the narrative began to shift. They thought they had taken everything my name, my space, my silence. But what they forgot is that I had something they didn't. Proof. Proof that I existed. Proof that I mattered. Proof that I wasn't going anywhere. And that was going to be their first mistake. It was strange how quickly things began to move once I'd made the decision to fight. Not loudly, not with threats or shouting matches, but with documents, with signatures, with witnesses and stamps, and the quiet power of someone who finally remembered she had rights and wasn't afraid to use them. Ashby moved like someone who'd done this 100 times, because she had. While I'd been busy raising a son who now saw me as disposable, she'd spent her career helping women who'd been quietly erased by family members who smiled to their faces and signed their names behind their backs. Within 48 hours, everything was in motion. The cease and desist letter had been hand-delivered to both Ben's office and April's clinic. A notification of ownership had been filed with the county clerk's office marking the property as under dispute and flagging any future title activity. And just as Ashby had advised, we filed a soft restriction with the neighborhood property registrar, a bureaucratic step most people don't even know exists. But Ashby did. That step ensured that any agent, lawyer, or lender attempting to inquire about the property without my consent would hit a wall. A polite, legally binding, unscalable wall. By the end of the week, I was no longer just a woman scorned or a mother cast aside. I was the legal owner formally recognized with protections in place to guard what was rightfully mine. It was empowering, but it was also deeply sobering. Because what kind of child makes this necessary? I hadn't spoken to Ben or April since the envelopes went out. I didn't expect a response, not right away. And yet, on Wednesday afternoon, my phone began to buzz. Once. Twice. It was Ben. No voicemail. No message. Just his name flashing on the screen over and over again. By the 6th missed call, a text finally came through from April. You didn't have to go this far. That was it. No apology, no admission, just a passive attempt to shame me for defending myself. I stared at that message for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed one line. Everything has a reason. So does this. I didn't expect her to understand, but I needed her to know that I hadn't acted out of rage or revenge. I had acted out of necessity. The next morning, I walked past my old neighborhood. I didn't go near the house. I didn't want to. But I did pass by the community garden where I used to bring Ben when he was little, back when his laughter used to echo between the raised beds and the compost bin we built together. From where I stood, I could just make out the backyard. The blinds were drawn. It was hard to imagine that house ever feeling like mine again. Later that day, Carol called. Her voice was tight-clipped in the way it always was when she had bad news. Ben emailed Ashby's office, through the generic inquiry form. He's asking if the documents are valid. He's fishing, I said, flatly. Yep, she replied, but he's too late. Ashby had responded personally with all the grace of a seasoned litigator. Her reply was short, firm, and attached copies of every filed document along with her license number and a note offering to direct him to the county records for independent confirmation. No emotion, just facts. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. That night around 7, I heard a knock at the door to my studio. I opened it just a crack, and there he was. Ben, my son. His face was pale, eyes tired. He looked, not angry, but confused, maybe even ashamed. "I just want to talk," he said. I didn't invite him in, but I stepped aside far enough to show I wasn't afraid. He walked in slowly, taking in the room, the papers on the table, the folders, the notarized copies, the safe tucked beneath the desk. He didn't touch anything, just stood by the window staring out. "I didn't know it had gotten this far," he began. "April, she thought you needed rest. She said you'd be okay with it." I didn't think I held up a hand. "Don't lie, not now." He went quiet, then sighed. I didn't want the conflict. I didn't want to be in the middle. It just felt easier to let her handle things. Easier. The word landed like a stone in my gut. "It wasn't about choosing her over you," he said quickly. "It was about avoiding the mess." "But I was the mess," I replied, my voice low. "That's how you saw me." He didn't deny it. Instead, he asked, "Is there anything I can do now?" I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I looked him in the eye and said what needed saying. "No. The alerts are in place. The title is secure. The house is no longer vulnerable, and I've made peace with that." He nodded slowly. There was nothing else left for him to say. When he walked out, I closed the door softly behind him. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just the quiet resolve of someone who had finally drawn the line and knew for once it would hold. The days that followed were uneventful on the surface. No more calls, no knocks at the door, no more carefully worded texts from April. But I knew better than to believe in peace that came so quickly. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, but coils. On Saturday morning, I got the confirmation I'd been waiting for. A white envelope arrived by courier, no return address, just my name typed in block letters. I opened it carefully, expecting some kind of half-hearted apology or maybe a legal bluff. It wasn't either. Inside was a copy of an internal inquiry from a real estate firm. A pre-sale evaluation form had been submitted for my house. The property address was listed. The form wasn't even addressed to me. It was addressed to Ben Langston and April Langston as if I no longer existed. I didn't panic. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and called Carol. Within the hour, she was at the studio with a folder in hand. She skimmed the document quickly and muttered under her breath, "They're testing the system, pushing to see if anything sticks." Ashby was on speaker a few minutes later. She moved like a surgeon, no wasted motion, no hesitation. "Time to file a second-level restriction," she said. "We'll notify the property office and flag the realtor directly. Any further inquiry will require direct in-person authorization from you, notarized and certified." The next layer of defense went up that same afternoon, and still I wasn't angry. I was stunned, yes, but not surprised. What did surprise me, though, was the boldness of it all. The audacity. After everything, after the letters, the restrictions, the confrontation, they were still trying. Still pretending I had no say. Still treating me as a ghost to be edited out of a contract. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed watching the ceiling fan spin and listening to the distant hum of traffic. Somewhere, someone was probably laughing over takeout. Somewhere, someone's son was planning a surprise birthday brunch for his mom, and mine was forging documents behind my back. The next afternoon, Ben came back. This time, he didn't knock. He just stood outside the door of the studio, hands in his jacket pockets, staring at the sidewalk. I saw him through the peephole, his posture stiff, but calm. I opened the door, not with warmth, but not with hostility either. He looked up, startled to see me. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. We stood on the landing, the chill of the breeze curling between us like a third presence. He didn't speak for a while. Then finally, April says, "You're trying to ruin us." I didn't respond. "She's scared," he added. "She thinks you're going to make this public, turn it into a lawsuit or worse." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "I haven't threatened anyone. I've protected myself. There's a difference." He nodded. "I know." Another silence. "I just didn't think you'd fight back," he admitted. "You've always let things go." That sentence hit harder than I expected. He didn't say it cruelly. He wasn't gloating. He was simply telling the truth. He thought I would stay quiet because I always had, because I had raised him with grace, because I had avoided conflict, because I'd once covered for his mistakes with teachers, with girlfriends, even with the cops that one time he borrowed a neighbor's Jeep to impress someone in high school, because I had made it easier for him to never be uncomfortable. And now that comfort had bred carelessness, arrogance even. "You knew," I said softly. "You always knew what she was doing." He didn't deny it. He didn't say a word. "You let it happen because it benefited you." Still, no reply. But I could see it in the way he clenched his jaw, in the way his hands curled into fists in his pockets. Not because he was angry at me, but because he knew I was right. "It wasn't cruelty," I said. "It was cowardice." He looked down, and when he spoke again, his voice was almost too soft to hear. "I didn't want to lose both of you." I exhaled sharply. Not out of sympathy, but out of exhaustion. "I was already lost," I said. "The moment you decided silence was safer than truth." He swallowed hard. "Is there anything I can do to fix this?" I shook my head. "The title is secure. The alerts are in place. The house is no longer vulnerable. But you have to live with what you allowed." He nodded slowly. Then I added, "You chose comfort over courage, and that has a cost." He left without another word. I watched him walk down the street, shoulders hunched, hands deep in his pockets, like he was trying to hold on to something that was already gone. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel grief. I felt free. It was Wednesday morning, and the air felt heavier than usual. The kind of gray that presses on your shoulders, even if nothing's wrong, except something was. I could feel it before I knew it. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee in the studio kitchen when the text came in. "I think we've got a problem," from Carol. 15 minutes later, I was in her office, seated across from her at the same weathered conference table where we once used to sort through insurance claims and dispute letters for elderly clients. But today, I wasn't a consultant. I was the case. She didn't greet me with a hug this time, just slid a thick file across the table, her mouth drawn tight. "Ashby asked me to print these and walk you through them." Inside the folder was a digital printout of a loan pre-approval application from a regional bank. And at the top of the form, right next to Ben Langston's name, was mine. My heart skipped. Below that, I saw it a signature. It looked familiar, too familiar, slanted like mine, looped like mine. But it wasn't mine. It had been copied, pasted. A poor imitation of something personal turned into a tool. The application had been submitted under a joint ownership profile listing both our names as co-owners of the house. Except, I never gave consent. I never signed that. And even worse, attached to the application was a scanned copy of my old driver's license, one I hadn't used in years, and a utility bill with my name barely visible, clearly outdated. Just enough to look legitimate at first glance. but not enough to survive real scrutiny. Carol looked at me, her voice steady. It's not just shady anymore, Marian. It's criminal. This is fraud. Wire fraud if they submitted anything digitally. Identity theft potentially. I felt the blood drain from my face, but not out of fear, out of recognition. All those little things, the help with bills, the disappearing mail, the hesitations when I brought up finances, it had been building to this. Not just removing me from the house. They were trying to use me to gain from it. Ashby arrived 20 minutes later, her steps sharp on the tile floor, her briefcase clutched in one hand like a weapon of law and order. She barely sat down before flipping through the file. When she reached the forged signature, she muttered, "Unbelievable," under her breath. Then she looked up at me. "This is what we call a fictitious authorization trail," she said. "He built a false digital profile using your name and documents. It's an attempt to use your legal presence to obtain funds without your knowledge." "Is it enough?" I asked. "To stop them?" She didn't hesitate. "It's enough to bury them." Ashby worked fast, almost too fast to follow. Within an hour, she had drafted a formal complaint to the bank's internal fraud investigation team, filed a preliminary notice with the local district attorney's office under quiet fraud protocol, prepared a freeze order on all real estate actions connected to the property, and most importantly, submitted a red-level alert to the neighborhood property registry, locking down my name and address from any unauthorized use. It wasn't just a wall. It was a vault. Ben wouldn't know what hit him until the moment he tried again and ran into reinforced steel. Carol sat beside me while Ashby filled out the paperwork, her hand resting lightly on mine. "Some sons," she whispered, "take after their mothers. Others learn from watching different kinds of people." I didn't speak. Instead, I looked out the window behind her desk. 2 sparrows were fighting over a crumb near the sidewalk, wings fluttering, feathers flying, both of them so small and yet so fierce. I thought about Ben as a child, how he used to race down that same sidewalk with scuffed knees and a gap-toothed smile. I remembered the way he cried when he lost his toy dinosaur in the neighbor's yard, and how I spent an hour digging through bushes to find it. And now, here we were. He wasn't crying anymore. He was calculating. By the end of the day, Ashby had filed notarized copies of every action and had duplicates stored across multiple systems. Carol scanned them into her firm's database just to be safe. Before I left, Ashby handed me a folder. Inside was everything I needed to know, every step taken, every document filed, every flag and restriction in place. She looked me in the eye. "If he tries anything else, the system will catch it. But you have a choice." A choice, I echoed. To press charges, or to let the walls do the talking. I nodded slowly. "I'm not there yet," I said. "But if he pushes again, I will be." That night back in the studio, I placed the folder on the desk beside my old wedding photo. The one where Bill and I were laughing, mid-dance, hands still entwined. No son, no daughter-in-law. Just 2 people who built a life the hard way, honestly. And in that moment, I realized something. They thought they had erased me, but I had written myself back in, with ink, and steel, and proof. The invitation came as a text. Short, polite. Almost too polite. "We're having a family discussion Saturday. Hope you can come. It's time to clear the air." Signed, of course, by Ben. I stared at the screen for a long time. Family discussion. As if that phrase still held weight. As if sitting at a table together could somehow undo the forged signatures, the silent betrayal, the months of being erased by the very people I once carried. Still, I forwarded the message to Ashby. Her reply came within minutes. "Let me come with you. Just in case." Saturday arrived draped in gray skies and the kind of wind that whispers warnings through your coat sleeves. Ashby picked me up in her navy blue sedan, dressed not like an attack dog, but like the most dangerous kind of woman, one who came prepared. She carried her leather briefcase on her lap, the notarized cease and desist letter clipped and bound inside. As we drove, I didn't speak much. Neither did she. There was no need. Everything worth saying had already been filed with the county. The house looked the same on the outside: white siding, red door, the same planter box filled with struggling petunias. But it felt different. Like a set piece built to resemble the life I once lived, only now stripped of soul. Ben opened the door. He looked like he'd rehearsed. Hair neatly combed, dress shirt tucked in, voice overly steady. "Thanks for coming," he said, then glanced at Ashby. "We weren't expecting your attorney." "She insisted," I said, and I didn't argue. The living room had been staged like it was ready for a magazine shoot. Cushions, perfectly fluffed candles flickering, a cheese board untouched in the center of the coffee table. April stood near the fireplace in a fitted sweater, her smile so wide it nearly cracked. We sat. No one reached for the cheese. April started things off, of course. "We know there's been tension," she said, with that PR smile she probably used at her wellness clinic. "And we wanted to bring everyone together for an open, respectful conversation." She gestured around the room. "This is still your home too, Marian." Ashby didn't even blink. She opened her briefcase, pulled out the letter, and set it gently on the table. Her voice was calm, unshakable. "Actually, this home belongs solely to my client, Ms. Marian Langston. She remains the only legal owner of record. Any claims to the contrary have been formally challenged and filed." The silence that followed was thick and immediate. Ben looked stunned, but not surprised. April blinked twice, as if trying to reboot a frozen screen. Ashby continued, flipping to a second page. "We are also aware of forged documents submitted to multiple institutions, including a joint loan application using falsified authorization. Those filings have been flagged, and further legal action is pending." April's voice dropped an octave. "This isn't how we wanted to do things." I finally looked at her, really looked, and I saw it, the cracks in her facade, the unraveling edge of control. Her eyes darted to Ben, who stayed silent, lips pressed into a tight line. "I'm not here to argue," I said, rising slowly. "I just want you both to hear this clearly." I turned toward April. "You tried to erase me, not with words, but with paperwork, with mail reroutes, with forged signatures and polite lies." Then I looked at Ben. "And you let her?" He looked down. He didn't deny it, didn't speak. "You both thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd slip quietly into the background, that I wouldn't fight." I leaned forward slightly, but I did. Ashby stood gathering the papers with practiced precision. "If you attempt to interfere again," she said, "legal proceedings will follow immediately." There were no threats in her tone, only certainty. We left without another word. Outside, the wind had picked up, but it didn't chill me the way it used to. In fact, I felt light. Like a weight had lifted not from my shoulders, but from my history. In the car, Ashby didn't speak for the first few minutes. Then as we approached the studio, she said, "You didn't just defend your house in there." I looked over. "You defended your name." And she was right, because what I walked away with wasn't just a legal victory or an emotional one. It was the quiet, steady truth that I had stood up not with noise, but with clarity. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't pleaded. I had simply shown up with evidence, with boundaries, and with the kind of strength that doesn't need applause. And sometimes, that's louder than any shout. The morning after the family meeting, I woke up before the sun. The studio was quiet, but not empty. The kind of stillness that felt earned, not imposed. I sat by the window holding a mug of lukewarm coffee and stared at the skyline where the early light pushed gently at the darkness. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt ready. It had taken months of silence, legal footwork, and emotional unraveling, but I was no longer waiting for an apology that would never come. I wasn't hoping for reconciliation or remorse. What I had found, instead, was something better. Clarity. That afternoon, I packed a single overnight bag and took a cab to the house one final time. Yes, I still had the keys. Yes, the title was still in my name. But none of that meant it felt like home anymore. Ownership and belonging, I'd come to learn, are two very different things. When I stepped through the front door, the scent of lemon cleaner and staged comfort hit me like a scripted memory. The furniture was arranged neatly. The photos on the mantel had changed no sign of me anywhere. April was in the kitchen rinsing dishes. She turned when she heard the door, her eyes widening just slightly, but she didn't speak. Ben was at the dining table, hands folded like a child waiting for a principal's verdict. "I'm not here to argue," I said, my voice steady. I walked to the table, placed a thick folder on it, and opened it slowly. Inside was the listing agreement. "Already signed. I'm selling the house," I said plainly. Ben's jaw clenched. April froze mid-dry with a towel in hand. I continued, "Not out of revenge, not to punish anyone, just because it's mine. And I no longer want to share my name with walls that have forgotten me." Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. I placed a second document on top of the first, a foundation charter. Its title read clearly, "The Over 60 Women's Equity Trust." Ben finally looked up. His voice cracked. "Where will you live?" I met his gaze. "That's not your concern anymore." He blinked and looked down again. April's lips parted as if to protest, but nothing came out. I saw the tremble in her shoulders, and for a brief moment wondered if she finally understood what she'd tried to erase. But I offered no comfort. Comfort had been exhausted. Then I said the part that mattered most. "The sale proceeds won't be going into your pockets." April stiffened. Ben didn't move. "I've already transferred the full amount into a fund for women over 60 who've been manipulated, discarded, or silenced by their own families." Neither of them responded. I didn't need them to. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten you. I didn't chase headlines or call lawyers for revenge. I chose something better. I stood ready to leave. Martina will serve as the foundation's executive director. Ashby will oversee compliance. Every dollar will go toward legal support, housing, and restoration for women who've lived in silence too long. I closed the folder and left it on the table. Ben whispered, "You didn't have to do this." I turned back one last time. "No. You didn't have to force me to." Then I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Not with rage, not with sadness, just with finality. And I walked down the path like it had never been mine. The sun had risen while I was inside. I hadn't noticed until I saw my breath in the cold air, fogging lightly in front of me. But I didn't feel cold. I felt warm. Warm in a way I hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, back at the studio, I sat at my desk and opened my phone. I pulled up a message Ashby had drafted for me, a brief press release announcing the foundation's launch. It wasn't dramatic. No photos, no headlines. Just a quiet announcement tucked into the back of a community newsletter. But I knew someone would read it, and I hoped they would sit with it, not with anger, but with loss. Not because I'd taken anything from them, but because they'd finally understood what they had thrown away. My new apartment isn't much. It's smaller than the old house, certainly. 2 rooms, 1 window that faces east, and a kitchen just big enough for me and a pot of chamomile tea. But for the first time in years, every corner of it feels like mine. There are no old ghosts in the walls, no lingering tension, no footsteps to listen for upstairs. Just quiet. The kind that doesn't make you feel forgotten, but safe. Each morning, I wake up to sunlight spilling across the wooden floorboards like a promise. I make tea lace up my walking shoes and head outside. There's a narrow trail behind the complex lined with low pine trees and wildflowers that change with the season. Most days, I pass the same woman jogging with her golden retriever. We don't speak, but a few weeks in, she started smiling first. I always smile back. Inside, I've kept things simple. A reading chair by the window. A small bookshelf with just enough space for the authors who taught me to speak up. 1 framed photograph of me alone at the ocean wind in my hair. I keep a lavender plant on the windowsill in a clay pot I named Mercy. No TV, just a radio I turn on in the evenings, usually jazz, sometimes weather. It's not silence, it's peace. Sometimes Martina visits bringing pastries and foundation updates. Donations have started to trickle in small checks, handwritten letters. One came from a woman in Utah who read about us in her church newsletter. She wrote, "Thank you for existing." I read it twice. I folded her letter and placed it in a wooden box in my closet next to the photo of Ben's graduation, what's left of it anyway. Someone had trimmed it. My face was gone, surgically removed like I'd never stood there beside them. I didn't cry. I didn't throw it away. I simply placed it in a cloth pouch and tucked it behind some old keys and a ribbon from Ben's 5th grade spelling bee. People think healing is thunder, but sometimes it moves like breath, quiet and slow. I never erased Ben or April from my memories. I simply chose not to center my life around people who had edited me out of theirs. That choice, that clarity gave me room to grow. One afternoon, I got a call from a women's group downtown. They were hosting a seminar on elder autonomy, wanted a speaker with real experience. I said yes, without hesitation. That night, standing by the window, watching the shadows stretch across the parking lot, I didn't feel erased. I felt present. There was peace in that. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I had been found. By me. And I think in the end, that's all we're really trying to do. Not return to who we were, but become who we were never allowed to be. Quietly, boldly, and without permission. If you'd like, I can now help package this entire 10-part story for YouTube voiceover script formatting, title suggestions, video description, or thumbnail text. Would you like to proceed with that? Thank you so much for staying with me through this story. If any part of it touched something deep inside you, if you've ever felt overlooked, replaced, or silenced, I want you to know you're not alone. So many women, especially those of us past a certain age, carry stories like this quietly. Stories of being erased, not with cruelty, but with paperwork avoidance and silence. If you have a story of your own, of loss, of reclaiming yourself, of quietly standing up, I invite you to share it in the comments. You never know who needs to read it today. Sometimes your voice is the one that helps another woman realize she still has one too. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen or reminded you of your own strength, please consider subscribing to this channel. We tell real stories here, honest ones, stories that deserve to be heard. Thank you truly for listening. And now it's your turn to speak.